The first thing she did when the shuttle stopped tumbling was check the candy. It was a stupid thing to check first. She knew that. There were warning lights screaming on every panel, a hull breach somewhere aft, and a smell in the cabin like wet copper that meant someone somewhere was bleeding into the air recyclers. But Yilo reached into the chest pocket of her field jacket and felt for the little tin, and only let herself breathe out when her thumb hit the dented lid. 3 pieces of hard sugar candy, wrapped in red foil, that had been in that pocket for 8 years. They were the candy her daughter had liked. They were probably inedible by now. She had never opened the tin. Then she did the rest of it. She ran the diagnostic. She called for the pilot and got static. She crawled forward through the cabin, past 2 unconscious orderlies and the body of the lieutenant who had been laughing about something stupid 40 seconds ago, and she put her ear against the cockpit door and heard nothing on the other side. She did not open the door. She had learned, in the colony wars, not to open doors when there was nothing on the other side. Outside the viewport, there were stars she did not recognize. That was the part she sat with for a moment. Yilo had served on 3 frontiers. She knew the shape of the sky over Tau Ceti, over Wolf 359, over the long, quiet arc of the Sagittarius Reach. She knew the constellations from the bridge of the hospital cruiser Margaret H. Scio the way other people knew the freckles on their own forearm. The stars outside her shuttle were not any of those stars. They were arranged in a pattern she had never seen and would not, she suspected, find on any chart Earth had ever drawn. She said aloud to no one, "Well, shit." The shuttle's emergency beacon was already pinging, automatic, plaintive, repeating its serial number into the void. She killed it. She did not know who was out there, but she knew this much. Anywhere a forward-age shuttle pinged loud and helpless, scavengers came. Pirates came. Worse things came. Better to be quiet and breathing than loud and dead. She checked her sidearm. She checked the medkit. She checked again that the tin of candy was in her pocket. Then she put on a thermal coat over her medic's whites, because the cabin was already cold, and she went looking for whatever was on the other side of the airlock. The other side of the airlock was a cathedral. That was the only word for it. The shuttle had come to rest somehow, impossibly, inside a hangar that was not a hangar. It was a great dim room with ribbed black columns rising into a vault she could not see the top of, and the floor was polished obsidian veined with something that looked like silver but pulsed, slow, the way a vein pulses, and the air smelled of incense and cold stone. There was no decking. There were no scuff marks. There was no oil or coolant, or the honest filth of any working bay she had ever stood inside. The shuttle behind her, blackened and gashed along one flank, looked obscene in the place, like a wounded animal dragged into a temple. There were also 6 of them, tall, standing very still. Yilo had her hand on her sidearm before she had finished counting. She did not draw. 8 years of triage had taught her one rule above all others. The body that is still standing is not the body you treat first. The ones still standing were not afraid. The ones still standing were waiting for her to do something stupid. They were not human. Their faces were narrow, the bones high, and their eyes were a flat reflective black like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. Their skin was the color of river clay. They wore robes the deep red of arterial blood, fastened at the shoulder with a metal disc that bore a number. She saw it on the nearest one, etched cleanly into the metal, 44. The next, 9. The next, 117. No names, just numbers, like serial codes on a clinical chart. The one designated 9 stepped forward. It opened its mouth and made a sound that was not language. Then a small device at its collar clicked, and the sound became language, flat and toneless, in something close to standard. "You are inside the veil of audience," it said. "Identify your registry." Yilo did not move her hand from the sidearm. "Captain Yilo," she said. "Earth Coalition Forward Aid. My ship was hit. I don't know how I got here." "That designation is not a registry." "That's my name." The thing tilted its head, a strange, almost avian gesture, very fast and very precise. "You are subject unregistered," it said, as if correcting her. "You will be processed." She almost laughed. She had been told she was about to be processed by enough customs officers, mid-level bureaucrats, and military intake clerks over the years that the word had lost most of its sting. But there was something in the way the alien said it, flat, unmusical, with no faint apology in the back of the throat, that made the skin on her forearms prickle. She had heard human beings say that word with more humanity than this thing had managed. She did not have time to answer, because that was when the screaming started. It came from somewhere deeper in the cathedral, a long, climbing, ragged sound that was unmistakably grief, even in a throat she did not know. The 6 alien figures all turned their heads at once, in perfect unison, as if a single string had been pulled. The one called 9 went very still. Then it said, almost to itself, "Already. He is going already." And without further ceremony, without a word to her or to the others, 9 turned and ran, the long-legged loping of a thing built for a different gravity, toward the source of the sound. The other 5 hesitated, looked at her, looked at each other. And then, because she had been a combat medic for 15 years, and the sound of a person dying was the only language she had ever learned to follow without thinking, Yilo ran after 9. She heard them shouting behind her. She did not stop. The corridor opened out into a chamber she would later try to describe and fail. There was a dais. There was a great chair that was not a throne but might as well have been, ribbed black like the columns, set with a single slab of something glassy and dark across its seat. On the slab lay a figure, taller than the others, robed in something white and stiff that looked less like cloth and more like carved bone, the long limbs arranged with terrible care. Around the dais stood perhaps 20 more of them, all with their numbered discs, all silent now. Beside the slab knelt a smaller one, no taller than Yilo's chest, with the same narrow face but unfinished somehow, the cheekbones not yet sharp, the black eyes wet, and Yilo realized she was looking at a child. The child was the one who had screamed. The child looked up when Yilo came in and went perfectly still, the way a small animal goes still in the presence of a wolf. On the slab, the long figure was dying. Yilo had seen enough death to know its weight on the air. The chest rose and fell, but shallowly. The lips were the wrong color, a gray-blue that, if her clinical instincts could be trusted in a body this strange, meant something close to what cyanosis meant in a human. There was a thin line of moisture at the corner of one eye. He was breathing, but he was not present. He was somewhere else already, halfway through whichever door his people went through. There was a tall figure standing at the head of the slab, wrapped in robes of pale gray, holding a slim instrument over the dying one's chest. A physician, Yilo knew at once. She could tell a physician by the way they stood in any species. This one's number on the disc at the shoulder was 2. The physician saw her, saw what she was wearing, registered the snake-hand staff patch on her sleeve, and its head did that quick avian tilt. "Subject unregistered," it said. "You are a healer." "Yes," Yilo said. "Then you will witness the crossing. You will not interfere." She looked at the dying one. She looked at the child on the floor. She looked at the room full of motionless, numbered onlookers, none of whom were touching him, none of whom were near enough to be touched. "What's wrong with him?" she said. "Sovereign Prime 0001 is undergoing terminal lattice collapse," the physician said. "It is the disease of long reign. It cannot be reversed." "Lattice collapse," Yilo repeated. "His neural substrate has lost coherence. The connections that sustain consciousness in our species are unraveling. He is, in your terms, dying of his own quietness." Yilo set down her medkit. She had no business doing it. She did not know this species. She did not know its tolerances, its drug compatibilities, its biology in any way that a textbook would respect. She did not know whether her stethoscope, when she pressed it to the long sternum, would even register a heartbeat she could read. She certainly did not know what dying of his own quietness meant, and any clinical brain still operating in her skull was telling her, loudly, sensibly, to back away, raise her hands, ask permission, file a request. But the child on the floor was crying without making any sound, and the room was full of people who would not go to him, and somewhere underneath all of her clinical training was the simple, unsanitary, profoundly human thing that had made her become a medic in the first place. She could not stand in a room with a dying person and do nothing. She knelt by the dais. The physician too hissed something, a sound the translator did not bother converting. She ignored it. She put 2 fingers against the long throat of the dying one and felt, faintly, a pulse. Slow, but there. Slower than it should be. She put her ear to the chest, which was a presumptuous thing to do to the king of anything, and listened. There was a heartbeat. It was small and rhythmic and almost embarrassed by its own persistence. There was also, beneath it, a quieter sound, a sort of soft, irregular whisper, like a bad valve. She did not know what it meant. She knew it should not be there. The child on the floor watched her with eyes the size of soup spoons. "Hi," Yellow said, soft, automatic, the way she would have said it to any child in any triage tent. The child blinked. The translator at the physician's collar repeated her word in their tongue, flat. The child did not blink again. Behind her, the physician said, "You will step away." Yellow did not step away. She did not look up. She said, in the calm, untheatrical voice she had used to talk people through abdominal wounds in 3 different war zones, "I will step away when I understand what's killing him. Tell me about lattice collapse. Talk to me like I'm a colleague." There was a silence so long that she thought maybe she had finally pushed the situation past the point of recoverability. She heard the soft shifting of robes, the others moving, perhaps for weapons, perhaps for restraints. She thought distantly that this was a stupid way to die. Then the physician too said, "He is a sovereign prime. He has reigned for 117 of your years. In our species, the burden of sovereign function is borne by suppressing the affective lattice, the substrate that processes attachment, joy, sorrow, the small valences. We learn this in childhood. Our most able learn it most completely. A sovereign prime suppresses entirely. It is the cost of the role. It is also, eventually, the cause of lattice collapse, because a lattice that is never used will, in time, fail to remember itself." Yellow listened. Her hand was still on the long throat. She felt the pulse stutter. "He is dying," the physician said, "because for 117 of your years, no one has been permitted to love him, and he has not been permitted to love. The neural geometry that would sustain him has gone fallow. We cannot grow it back. We have tried." For a long moment, Yellow did not move. She had heard in her life every kind of explanation a dying body would accept, and every kind it would refuse. She had heard ICU doctors at 3 in the morning explain, in tired and exact words, why a patient was about to slip away. She had heard mothers in field hospitals tell her things about their sons that no chart could have predicted. She thought, listening to the alien physician, that she had never in her life been told a thing about a dying body that she believed more completely or wanted more violently to argue with. She lifted her hand from the king's throat. She turned and she looked at the child on the floor. "You can come here," she said. The translator clicked. The child did not move. "You can come and sit with him," Yellow said. "It's all right. He's still here. He's still listening, I think. You can sit with him." The child looked at the physician. The physician did not answer. The child looked at the others. The others did not answer. The child looked back at Yellow, and the wet black eyes did something, a small, complicated thing. And then the child scooted, on its knees, in small, unsteady shuffles, across the obsidian floor to the dais. Yellow lifted the child up onto the slab. The child weighed almost nothing. "There," Yellow said. "Hold his hand like this. Yes, yours over his." The physician made a sound. It was not, this time, a hiss. It was something more like a sharp intake. Yilo did not look at the physician. She reached into her chest pocket. She took out the dented tin. She opened it for the first time in 8 years. The candy inside was old, the red foil had gone dull, the corners crinkled, but the sugar smelled like sugar still, faintly, the way old things smell of what they were. She unwrapped one piece. She placed it, careful, into the slack mouth of the dying king. "My daughter loved these," she said, to no one in the room, to herself, to the dying king who would not hear her. She used to suck them so slow they would last her the whole walk home from school. She would get them stuck in her back teeth and complain about it for a week. "I have not given one of these to anyone for a long time." She closed the tin. She set it on the slab beside the king's hand, and the child's small fingers laced over his. She said, gentle, to the dying king, "All right, sir. You have a child here who needs you, so you are going to come back. We have not been introduced. My name is Yilo. I am going to give you a name too, because nobody should die without one, and 0001 is not a name. I am going to call you Aaron. It is a good name. It is short and it sounds like a real thing. If you do not like it, you can tell me later. All right, you are going to come back now." The room had gone perfectly silent. Yilo did not look up. She did not in that moment much care what the room thought. The child on the slab made a small sound. The child was, Yilo realized, humming. It was a thin, uncertain, 6-note thing. Perhaps the closest equivalent in this species' culture to a lullaby. Perhaps just a noise the child made when frightened. But it was the first sound she had heard any of them make that was not flat or imperial or correct. The pulse under her hand stuttered, stopped for an awful half-second. Then started again. Steadier. The king did not wake that night. He did not wake the next day either. But he did not die, and that Yilo would learn over the following weeks was the part the Velkari Imperium did not know how to forgive her for. In the cathedral, in those first hours, she had stayed beside the slab long after the candy had dissolved in the slack mouth and Ren had cried herself out, and the physician too had stood, helpless, at the head of the dais and watched her work. She had asked the physician questions, and the physician had answered them, grudgingly at first and then with something closer to a colleague's voice. She had asked about the king's pulse range, his oxygen saturation, the typical course of lattice collapse. She had asked carefully what their species' equivalent of cardiopulmonary support looked like, in case it became necessary. The physician had shown her a thin instrument, a small clear field that would maintain circulation if the heart stopped. She had nodded. She had not, in the end, needed it. The king's heart had stuttered that night, twice more, small frightened skips, the kind of arrhythmia that in a human would have meant fetching the crash cart. But each time, just as her hand had tightened on the kit, the heart had picked itself up again and gone on, as if it had been reminded. She had stayed until she could not stay. Sometime in what she later learned was the small hours, 2 of the numbered ones had come and lifted her gently to her feet. She had been kneeling so long her legs had gone and walked her, without unkindness, to the cell. She had not protested. She had asked only that the child be allowed to stay with the king, and the physician too, after a moment's hesitation, had said yes. She had taken that yes with her into the cell and held onto it through the long first day, when she had nothing else to hold onto at all. There was a holding cell. They were polite about it. The cell had a window of sorts, set into a stone wall that looked out onto what she eventually understood was a city, or the upper layer of one, glittering and silent below the curve of the world. The food they brought her was nutritionally adequate and tasted like nothing. She ate it. She slept in short, watchful bursts. She kept her sidearm under her thin pillow until the second day, when she realized that if they had wanted her dead, they would have killed her already, and she set it on the small ledge beside the bed and slept, for the first time, all the way through. The first day she had not slept at all. She had sat with her back against the wall and watched the door and gone, methodically, through every grim accounting a captive medic could go through. She cataloged what she had on her sidearm: 3 magazines, the slim field knife strapped under her jacket, the candy tin, a packet of analgesic tablets, a roll of self-suturing tape, a small flashlight, a coin she had been carrying for so long she could no longer remember where it was from. She cataloged what she did not have on her: water beyond the small ration the Velkari brought her every 6 hours, food beyond what they brought, a radio, an idea where she was. She cataloged, after all of that, what she knew. The knowing was not a long list. She knew there had been a king. She knew the king was alive when she had left the cathedral. She did not know whether he was still alive. She did not know whether anyone in this enormous quiet building remembered she existed. She had spent a long time that first day thinking about whether the king would die overnight, and whether her death would follow shortly after, perhaps as a quiet courtesy, the way some species disposed of witnesses to their inadequacies. She had decided by morning that if it came it would come, and there was nothing useful to be done about it from a small cell with one window. So she had eaten the bland food. She had washed her face in the small basin. She had checked again the dented tin in her pocket. And she had set herself to the only work a medic could do alone in a stone room. She made lists of the things she had observed about Velkari biology in case she ever needed them. The high carotid placement of the throat artery, the slow pulse, half a human's at rest, the slate-gray color of failing oxygenation, the fact that the king, when she had pressed her ear to his chest, had had a small irregular whisper under the main beat that she now suspected was not a valve at all but a second, smaller heart. She wrote it all down on the back of her ration card with the stub of a pencil from her med kit, and when she had finished, she folded the card and put it in her pocket beside the tin, where the most important things in her life had always lived. On the second day, a younger one of them came in. It carried a tray. It set the tray down. It stood near the door with its back to the wall and watched her eat, which she did slowly, because being watched while eating was a thing she had learned to ignore in 3 different field hospitals. When she finished, the young Velkari said nothing, took the tray and turned to leave. "Wait," Yellow said. It paused. "How is he?" she said. It did not answer for so long that she thought it would not answer at all. Then it said, in a voice the translator at its collar pushed into standard with reluctance, "He is breathing." "Is he awake?" "Not yet. He opens his eyes, he closes them." "Is the child with him?" There was, again, the long Velkari pause that she would come to know, the small private moment in which a member of this species seemed to be considering, very carefully, whether to be honest. "Yes," it said finally. "The successor will not leave him. We have tried." "Good," Yellow said. "Don't try any more. Let her stay." The young one tilted its head, the bird-quick angle, the one she had started to recognize as something close to curiosity, and left. It came back at the next meal. It set down the tray. It watched her eat. It said before leaving, "He looked at the candy today, for a long time." She did not answer. She did not trust her voice. She nodded, the small useful nod, and the young Velkari took the empty tray and went. On the third day they brought the child. It came in alone, no escort. It stood in the doorway and watched her for a long time, the wet black eyes blinking slowly, and then it walked the small distance across the cell and climbed up onto the bed beside her and sat there and waited. Yellow was halfway through her ration cup. She set the cup down. "Hello," she said. The child did not answer. "Did anyone tell you my name? It's Yellow. Can you say it? Yellow, 2 syllables, easy." The child's small mouth moved. The sound that came out was not quite the word, but the shape of it was correct. The translator at the child's collar, Yellow had not noticed it before. She realized with a small private shock that they had given the child a translator before they had given the child anything else, repeated, in flat standard, "Yellow." "Good," Yellow said. "And you, what do they call you?" The child looked at her. There was something in the small face that Yellow recognized. She could not say from where, but she recognized it. The translator clicked. "Successor candidate 0037, it said. Yi Lo took a breath. That's not a name, she said. That's a job. The child did not understand. The child did not, Yi Lo realized, have any framework for understanding. The child had been told a string of digits since the day it was old enough to be told things, and the digits were the closest thing to a name the child had ever owned. All right, Yi Lo said. Then I am going to give you one too. You can keep it or not keep it. It is yours. Will you let me? The child watched her. I am going to call you Wren, Yi Lo said. Because where I am from, a wren is a small, clever bird that sings louder than it should, and I think you are going to be loud enough one day. Is that all right? The child said, in a small voice that the translator pushed into standard with mechanical patience. Wren. Yes. Wren. Yes, that's you. The child sat with this for a long time. Then it leaned, very slowly and with the gravity of an oath being sworn, against Yi Lo's side. Yi Lo did not move. She had learned with her own child that the worst thing you could do to a small creature about to trust you was to be glad about it too loudly. She let the child lean. She put her arm, after a careful moment, around the child's shoulders. She said quiet, How is he, Wren? He sleeps. Does he wake? He opens his eyes, he looks at the candy, he closes them again. Does he speak? The child was silent. Then, in the smallest voice yet, he said my number. And what did you do? I said no, Wren. Yi Lo closed her eyes. She had not, in any of the wars she had been in, won anything as completely as she had just won. She did not know whether she would ever explain that to anyone. She did not know that she needed to. They came for her eventually. Not the physician this time. A different one, taller, older, the face more lined, the disc at the shoulder reading 3. It addressed her without preamble. You will come to the Veil of Audience, it said. The Sovereign Prime is conscious. He has issued a summons. Yi Lo stood. She straightened her medic's whites, which were now neither white nor exactly straight. She put the tin of candy, empty now, except for 2 pieces. She had eaten one yesterday slowly, the way her daughter used to, back into her chest pocket. She tucked Wren's small hand into her own. All right, 003, she said, and saw the alien's narrow head do the avian tilt. Lead the way. The cathedral, when she returned to it, was different. The slab was still there. The king was still on it mostly, but he was raised now, propped against a long curve of black stone, and his eyes were open, and they were not at all the eyes of a thing that had been about to die. They were dark, and they were lucid, and they were tired in a way she had only ever seen in people who had been very ill for a very long time and had come back unsure whether they should have. He looked at her. He did not for a long moment speak. Then he said in their language, and a translator on a nearby stand caught it and pushed it into standard with a slight delay. You called me Aaron. I did, Yi Lo said. Why? She thought about it. She had thought it would be a harder question. It was not. Because everyone deserves a name, she said. Because the people in this room have been calling you a number for 117 years, and I do not think a number is enough for the inside of a person to hold on to. I do not think you can die properly when you are a number. I am not certain you can live properly either. The king looked at the child standing beside her. He looked at the small hand inside her larger one. He said, and her. Wren, Yi Lo said. Wren, the king repeated. He said it with care, like he was testing whether it would crack. Behind her the physician too said, sharp, Sovereign Prime, the contamination protocol must begin. The subject unregistered has introduced effective vectors. You are at risk of. The king lifted one long hand. The physician stopped speaking. It was the first thing Yi Lo had seen, in the cathedral, that looked like power. The king said, slow, I have been at risk for 117 years of dying very correctly. I am not at risk anymore. Stand down. The physician stood down. Yi Lo took a breath. She had not realized she had been holding it. The king turned his black eyes back to her. He said, "You will tell me about your daughter." She stared at him. She had not told him about her daughter. She had not told anyone in the cathedral about her daughter. She had said, beside the dais, only that her daughter had liked the candy. She had not said the word daughter. She had not said the word died. She had not said the word 8 years. The king saw her face. He said, almost gentle, and the gentleness was the strangest thing she had heard in any throat in this place, "I heard you, while I was sleeping. I heard everything. Tell me about her." She told him. She told him slowly, because she had not told anyone in a long time. She told him the daughter's name, May. She told him that May had been 7. She told him that May had liked these candies, and bird watching, and a song from a cartoon Yilo had hated and had nevertheless learned to hum because May had loved it. She told him about the colony, the small one, the third one out, with the dust storms. She told him about the day the dust storm had come early. She told him about the field clinic that had not been ready, and the things she had not been able to do for her own child even though she had done them, thousands of times, for other people's children, because she was a medic, and that was what medics did, and on that one day it had not been enough. She did not cry. She had cried over the years in the appropriate places and in the appropriate company. She did not cry here, because she did not know yet whether crying meant anything to any of the people in the room, and she did not want to give them a gesture they would not understand. But her voice did the small wobble it always did when she said the name, and the king of the Velkari Imperium watched her say it, and his face did a thing she did not have a word for. When she was finished, he said, "I am sorry." It was, the translator told her later, a phrase the Velkari language did not have. The translator had not, in fact, translated it. The king had said it in her tongue. He had been listening to her language for 3 days asleep, and he had learned that one phrase first because he had needed it first. She did not know what to say. She nodded, the small useful nod she had used on every parent who had ever stood beside her in any triage tent, and she said, quiet, "Thank you, Aaron." There was a long silence. Then from somewhere in the assembled court, a sound, small, sharp, unmistakable. One of the numbered nobles had made a noise, not a word, just a noise. The kind of noise a person makes when they did not know they were going to make it. Yilo looked. It was an older one near the back, the disc reading 11. The black eyes were wet. The thin mouth was working without sound. She thought with a kind of slow wonder, oh, so they can. She said to the king, "Aaron, may I ask, how many of your people have ever heard one of you say that phrase?" He thought about it. He said, "I do not believe any of them have." She nodded again. She did not know what to do with this information. She filed it, the way she filed all enormous things in the middle of a shift to be dealt with later when she was off the floor. The trouble came on the 7th day. She had been moved by then into more comfortable quarters, a small set of rooms near the king's, with a window that opened onto a courtyard of pale stones and a low bed, and a chair that approximated almost the shape of a human body. Ren slept on the floor at the foot of the bed, on a mat the child had carried in itself, and refused every night to be moved. Yilo had stopped arguing. The trouble came in the form of footsteps in the corridor outside her door late, when the corridor should have been quiet. Yilo had been in enough places where footsteps in the corridor late at night meant nothing, and enough places where they meant everything to know the difference. These footsteps meant everything. They were too soft. They were too many. They were trying to be the first kind of footsteps and failing. She was on her feet before the door opened. She had her sidearm in her hand. She had pushed Ren into the small alcove behind the curtain and put her body between the child and the door opened, and there were 4 of them, and they had blades. She shot the first one in the throat. It was not a thing she was proud of. The Velkari, she had learned, kept the great artery of their throat lower and farther forward than humans did, almost exposed, in the way the robes draped, and she had noticed this in a way she had wished she had not noticed it. The first one made a wet sound and fell sideways. The second one came at her with the blade raised, and she shot it in the chest, and the chest was not where its heart was, but the round did enough to drop it. The third one got close enough to swing. She turned her shoulder into the blade and felt the long, cold pull of it across the meat of her upper arm and ignored it, because she had been cut by sharper things in worse rooms, and she put the muzzle of the sidearm under its jaw and pulled the trigger. The fourth one stopped in the doorway. The fourth one had not, perhaps, expected the human to be quick. Yellow, bleeding from her arm and aware in some distant clinical way that the bleeding was going to be a problem in about 3 minutes, pointed the sidearm at the fourth one's face and said, "Soft. I have not yet decided." The fourth one dropped its blade. She did not shoot it. She had been a medic for 15 years. She could not always remember why, but she had been, and old habits held. The corridor outside filled then with running footsteps, real ones this time, not pretending, and the king's guard poured into the room, and Ren came out from behind the curtain crying without making any sound, and Yellow sat down on the bed because her legs had decided to be done now, and she said to the guard captain, who was new and whose number she did not know, "Get someone to pressure bandage this, and do not kill the one in the doorway. He's going to tell us things." The king came down himself, an hour later, when she had been bandaged and sutured and given something for the pain that tasted like cold metal. He came into her room without announcement. He stood at the foot of the bed and he looked at her for a long time and he said, "I am sorry." "You said that already, Aaron." "I will say it more often, I think." "That's all right, I'll get used to it." He sat. The chair did not exactly fit him either. He looked at her bandaged arm. He looked at Ren, who had been peeled finally off her side and put to sleep on the floor mat. He looked back at her. He said, "There is a faction at the court. There has always been a faction at the court. They believed I should have died on the dais, and they believed the throne should pass to one of their own line, and your interference with the protocol has, they would say, disrupted the natural order. They tried to kill a child." "Yes." "In her sleep." "Yes." Yellow took a breath. She put it back down. "Aaron," she said, "I am going to give you some unsolicited advice, as a person from a species you do not know. Please. The faction has to go. They are nobles of old line. They tried to kill a child in her sleep, Aaron." He looked at her. His mouth made a small movement, not quite a smile. The Velkari face did not quite do that, or had not done it for a long time, and what he had was a memory of an expression rather than the expression itself. But it was the closest thing to a smile she had yet seen on any of them. He said, "I have been advised." The faction went. She did not watch how, she did not ask. She was a medic, and she had killed 3 of them in a doorway with a sidearm, and she did not regret it, but she had no taste for the long, quiet machinery of a court purge, and she stayed in her quarters with Ren during the days that followed and let the king do the work that the king had to do. She read instead. They had brought her a reader, full of texts she could not entirely follow, but the translator was patient, and she learned things about the Velkari that no human file would ever have on it. She learned that they had been a species capable of music, once. She learned that they had songs in the archives that no one had sung in 11 generations because no one had been taught how. She learned that they had a word in the old tongue for the feeling of a small hand in a larger hand, and the word had not been spoken aloud by anyone in 700 years because the feeling itself had been forgotten. She thought sometimes, sitting in her chair with the reader on her lap and Ren leaned against her hip humming the 6-note thing that was probably not a lullaby and was now definitely a lullaby. "Oh, you poor proud people. Oh, you poor brilliant proud people. You built a civilization that conquered 3 arms of a galaxy, and you forgot the word for a child holding your hand." On the 20th day, the king came to her quarters at dusk, alone, and sat in the chair and said, Earth's fleet has found you. She had known this would come. She had known in the back of her chest, since the day she stopped pinging the beacon. How far out, she said. 3 days. What did you say to them? I have not yet said anything. I am asking you what I should say. She thought about it. She looked at Ren on the floor mat. She looked at the bandage on her arm, which had become a long pale scar she would carry the rest of her life, and which she was, in some private way, glad to carry. She looked at the king of an empire who had asked her, the day before, very seriously, whether his pronunciation of the word thank was improving because he was practicing. She said, "Tell them the truth. Tell them you are not at war with us. Tell them I am alive and I am going home." He looked at her for a long time. He said, "Yellow, there is a thing the court will require of me when you go." "What thing?" "They will require that I be restored, that my exposure to your species be removed from the lattice. They will say that the sovereign prime cannot rule under effective influence. They will say it is the law." She thought about it. "And what will you say to them?" she asked. He sat with this. The black eyes did not leave her face. He said slowly, "I will say that the sovereign prime ruled for 117 years without effective influence, and the sovereign prime was dying. I will say that the sovereign prime now intends to rule with effective influence, and the sovereign prime is alive. I will say that any member of the court who wishes to argue the relative merits of the two states is welcome to do so, in writing, addressed to the floor of the veil of audience, and I will read the argument personally, and I will respond personally, and I will remember the name of every person who signs." Yellow, who had been a captain in 3 wars and had heard a great many speeches of varying quality, took a breath and let it out slow. She said, "Aaron, yes, that was a very good speech. Thank you. You're getting better at that one too." "I am practicing." The fleet arrived on the 3rd day, as he had said. They were not, by then, in attack formation. The king had spoken to them. The king had spoken to them in person, on a long open channel, sitting on the throne that was not a throne, with his small successor Ren on a low chair beside him, and the lights of the veil of audience burning the deep gold of a thing finally awake. The fleet had listened. The fleet's admiral, a woman Yellow had served under 12 years ago and who had once eaten cold instant noodles with her in a field hospital at 3 in the morning, had said on the channel, "Captain Yellow, can you confirm you are safe?" "I am safe, ma'am." "Are you under duress?" "No, ma'am." "Are you cleared to come home?" She had looked at the king. The king had looked at her. The king had said, in flat, unhurried standard that he had practiced for 3 days, "She is cleared to come home, Admiral. She is also welcome here. The distinction is hers." She had said after a moment, "I'm coming home, ma'am." Acknowledged. The shuttle that came down for her was not her shuttle. Her shuttle was still in the cathedral, scorched and bent, a thing she would never fly again. The king had said, very seriously, that he intended to keep her shuttle in the cathedral exactly where it sat, as a marker. She had told him that the cathedral was going to smell like burned plastic for a long time. He had said he did not mind. She packed light. She had not brought much. She packed the empty candy tin because she had grown attached to it, and she packed her medic's whites, which had been cleaned and pressed, and were no longer entirely white in the places where the blood had set. She packed the reader which the king had given her as a gift. She did not pack a weapon. She did not need one. Ren came with her down to the courtyard, where the shuttle waited. The courtyard had filled by then in a way she had not expected. There were rows of them, Velkari, hundreds of them in their robes of every color, standing in the pale stones in long disciplined ranks. None of them spoke. They watched her come down the steps with the small successor's hand in her hand, and they were all of them, every last one of them, watching with the wet, quiet black eyes of a species that had remembered, in 3 weeks, what it had spent 11 generations forgetting. The king was waiting at the shuttle. He had with him a small object wrapped in dark cloth. He said, "I would give you a gift." "All right." He unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a piece of stone, polished, the size of her palm. On the stone was carved a single word in the long looping script of his people. She could not read it. "What does it say, Aaron?" He thought about how to translate it. He said, finally, "It is the old word for the small hand in the larger hand, the one we had lost." She took it. She held it for a long moment in her own hand. She did not this time do the small, useful nod. She did not this time manage to keep her face quite straight. "Aaron," she said, "thank you." "You are welcome." She knelt down to Ren. Ren did not this time lean against her. Ren stood very straight, the way the king had begun to stand, the small, narrow shoulders set. The small face was, in the Velkhari way, mostly without expression, but the wet eyes were not still. "I will see you again," Yellow said to Ren, and she meant it. "You will," said Ren. "Practice your name." "I will." "Practice his too. The one I gave him, he needs the practice." "I will." Yellow reached into her chest pocket and took out the tin. She opened it. There were 2 pieces of candy left. She unwrapped one and put it into Ren's small hand. She closed the small fingers over it. "For later," she said. "Yellow." "Oh." "I will give one to him also, when he is sad." She had not until then cried. She did not cry then either, because there were too many of them watching, and she had been a captain in 3 wars, and there were certain habits a captain in 3 wars did not break, even at the end. But she did, for a moment, put her forehead against the smaller forehead, in the way her own mother had once done with her, and she said, very soft, "That's right, Ren. That's exactly right." She stood. She turned. She walked up the ramp of the shuttle without looking back, because she had also learned in 3 wars that you do not look back at the things that will not be there when you turn around, and she did not entirely trust herself in that moment with the rest. The shuttle door closed. The shuttle lifted. The shuttle climbed up through the long gold afternoon of the Velkhari capital, and Yellow, in her seat by the viewport, looked down at the pale courtyard and saw, with the slow, disbelieving clarity of a person watching a thing she would never be able to make anyone believe later, every Velkhari in the courtyard, hundreds, perhaps 1,000, lower themselves, in one slow, careful movement onto one knee. The king lowered with them. The successor with the candy in her hand lowered too. They held the posture as the shuttle climbed. They held it until she could no longer see the courtyard at all. It was a posture, she would learn later, that the Velkhari had not performed in 10,000 years. It was a posture they had reserved in the old language, for a thing that was holy and had walked among them. She got home. She did the things you did when you got home. She filed her report. She gave her debrief. She sat in a long, bright room and answered, for 3 days, the patient questions of polite officers who did not always entirely believe her, and who did, in the end, decide that what they did not believe did not matter, because the long, careful signals coming back from the Velkhari Imperium were saying things no human diplomat had ever heard another species say to Earth, and were saying them in formal language and with great patience. The signals came in waves. They asked at first the small things. They asked for cultural exchange. They asked for the rules of address. They asked, with what Yellow recognized as their version of acute embarrassment, how one properly thanked a person. There was a small flurry of irritation at the Earth Foreign Office when a Velkhari delegation asked, on an open channel, whether there were, anywhere on Earth, recordings of the song the captain's daughter had liked, and could a copy please be forwarded. The Earth Foreign Office sent the recording. The Velkhari Imperium replied 2 days later that they were grateful. The reply was sent in the old language, and the translation team flagged the phrasing, and the translation team sent a quiet note up the chain that said, "This language has not been used on a state document in 900 years. The signals kept coming. The Velkari, in time, asked for permission to send a permanent embassy. The embassy was granted. The embassy was a small one at first. It grew. The Velkari, it turned out, were a species of great patience and great practical intelligence, and once they had remembered the small things they had forgotten how to do, they remembered them with a thoroughness that no human bureaucracy could quite match. They learned to thank. They learned to grieve. They learned to laugh, which took longer, and which they did at first very badly, in a sort of broken hissing that made human children scream in delight, and which, to the Velkari themselves, was the source of enormous private pride. They learned to name their children. That was the part Yilo had not predicted, and the part that would, in time, change them more than any of the others. The Velkari, by ancient custom, had not named children until the children were 15 of their years old and had been verified into a registry function. The custom changed. The custom changed quickly, the way customs change when no one quite remembers why they were customs in the first place. The Velkari began to name their children at birth. The names were strange at first. They borrowed many from Earth, including, Yilo learned, an enormous number from a single popular Earth cartoon that had been broadcast accidentally to the Velkari home world on a stray relay, and had been mistaken, for some weeks, for an official cultural transmission. There were, for a brief period, a great many small Velkari children named after the supporting cast of a children's program about a talking forklift. Yilo, when she heard about this, laughed for the first time in a long time. The other thing they did, the Velkari, was not predicted by any analyst on Earth. They began slowly to declare Earth a sacred world. It was not a religious declaration in the way a human would have understood it. The Velkari had not, in their long history, kept gods. They had kept registries. But they declared, in a series of formal proclamations spread out over the course of several years, that the small world at the end of the Sagittarius arm, the one with the pale moon and the medic who had come, by accident, through their cathedral, was to be regarded as a place of remembrance. Their pilgrims came. They were quiet pilgrims, polite ones. They asked only to visit certain places. They asked to visit, in particular, the small colony on the third planet of the Tau system, where the dust storms came early, and they asked to leave, at a small marker there, a single piece of hard candy each. The colony government, after some confusion, allowed it. The marker, in time, was buried in a small mountain of red foil wrappers that no one was ever allowed to clear away. Yilo went back once to visit. She went alone. She did not tell anyone she was going. She landed at the small colony port and walked the long road out to the marker which had been her daughter's, and she stood there for a while in the early dust of the day and looked at the great drift of red foil at the base of the stone. She knelt down. She picked one of the wrappers up. It was old. It had been there a long time. There was, on the inside of the foil, in the small, careful script of a hand she did not know, a single word. She did not know the word, but she knew the shape of the script. She tucked the wrapper into her chest pocket, next to the dented tin. She walked back down the road. The king lived a long time after that, by the standards of his species. The Velkari, when their lattice was properly nourished, lived longer than anyone had previously realized, and the king lived for many of Earth's decades after Yilo went home. He sent her in those decades a great many messages. They were short messages, mostly. They were full of small things. He told her once that he had learned to hum the 6-note thing. He told her another time that Ren had grown tall and had taken the throne and was very serious about the work, but had inherited from him, he was sorry to say, an unfortunate fondness for hard candy. He told her in the last of the messages that he was tired now and was going to sleep soon, and he was not afraid of the sleep, because she had taught him that a person could lie down knowing they had been seen. She wrote back every time. She had kept all through her life after a small leather folio of his messages. The folio sat on the same shelf as the candy tin and the carved stone, and she would take it down on certain evenings and read through it. The messages did not change much in tone. They grew, with time, more careful in their phrasing. The king learned the small human softnesses of language, the way an old letter could be turned by a single word, and they grew, also, more quiet. She read them in order, sometimes, the way other people read the photographs of a long friendship. She read them out of order sometimes, when she wanted a particular one. There was one she returned to often, written perhaps a decade after she had come home, in which the king had described, at some length, the first time Wren had laughed aloud at a thing he had said deliberately to make her laugh. He had been, he wrote, very proud of himself. He had been, he wrote, also somewhat afraid because the laugh had been such a strange, small sound, and he had not been at all certain in the moment what to do with it. He had asked her in the message what one was supposed to do when a child one loved laughed. He had wanted to be sure he had done it correctly. He had not wanted to do that one wrong. She had written back that he had probably done it correctly, because the child had laughed a second time, and a child only laughed a second time if the first time had felt safe. She wrote in the last reply, "Aaron, lie down, sleep well. I will see you on the other side if there is one, and I will give you a candy and we will sit. Ye lo." The reply came back the next day from Wren. It said only, he read it, he smiled, he is gone. Ye lo sat with it for a long time. She was old by then. The scar on her upper arm had gone silver. The candy tin had finally rusted shut and lived now on the small shelf above her bed, beside a piece of polished stone with a word carved on it that she had, by then, learned to read. She got up finally from the chair. She went to the shelf. She took the stone in her hand. She held it for a long moment, the small hand of an old woman, and she said, quiet, "All right, Aaron, all right." Then she went out into the small garden behind her small house, and she sat on the bench in the long late light, and she watched a wren, a small one, brown, the kind from her own world, the kind there had been all her life, come down to the feeder and sing louder than it should have, and she listened to it, and she smiled, and she stayed there for a while. Years later, long after Ye lo herself had gone, the Valkyrie Imperium sent, on the anniversary of the day she had come home, a single ship to the small colony where the marker was. The ship landed quietly. A delegation came out. Wren was very old by then and walked with a stick. She stood in front of the marker for a long time, and she did not speak. Then she reached into the deep pocket of her robe and took out a small tin, dented, the lid bent in one corner, and she opened it. There was one piece of candy left inside. She unwrapped it. She placed it, careful, on the top of the marker. She said, in standard, in the patient, careful voice she had learned, all those years ago, from a woman in a medic's white coat, "For later, Ye lo." Then she turned and she went home.